DevOps.com webinar. Today's webinar is sponsored by PagerDuty, and it's titled Introduction to Being an Incident Commander. By commando, of course, we mean someone who's leading the response team during a major incident. And for any of you out there who have been in that war room or have had to unfortunately lead or even be part of a team during a major incident, you know how chaotic and pressure packed it can be. We hope that this webinar will help you, if you ever have to do it again, help you handle it much better. Our guest for this webinar is Eric Sigler, Head of DevOps at PagerDuty. And he's going to be going over what is an incident commander, the role and responsibilities of an incident commander, incident call procedures and terminology, and incident commander skills for success. We hope you like the webinar, and we hope to see you soon on another DevOps.com webinar. Many thanks for PagerDuty for sponsoring. And now let's get right to our webinar.
Howdy everyone, my name is Eric Sigler and I'll be your host for today's webinar, Introduction to Being an Incident Commander. Today I'm going to go over a few different topics around incident response and specifically the role of the incident commander. By the end of this webinar, you'll have a better understanding of incident response and how to act as an incident commander. In a future webinar, we will go over how to be a subject matter expert, or basically an individual incident responder. For a little background on me, I've been working in operations for almost 15 years, and I've led incident response teams at multiple companies. I'm one of the incident commanders here at PagerDuty, and I still get woken up at 3 a.m. So first up, let's define some basics. What is incident response, and why should we bother having any of this structure at all? Well, at its heart, it's an organized approach to addressing and managing an incident. By adding in a consistent structure and process, you get two key benefits. Responders don't have to spend valuable time trying to figure out issues not directly related to the incident at hand. They not only get a time benefit from having a prepared process, but they also have less cognitive effort spent on things that aren't the problem. And then the rest of the business gains a better understanding of how to find out more about the incident, who's involved, and how it will be handled. You can think of incident response as rapidly forming a one-off team to solve a specific problem for your company. And every team needs some structure to be provided, goals to be defined, and expectations to be set. If you haven't already in your own organizations, your first step is to define what it means to actually be an incident. It sounds silly, but if you're not sure if something's an incident or not, you don't know if you should be responding to it. So this is PagerDuty's definition of an incident. Your company's might be different, and that's okay. Just make sure that you have a definition somewhere and keep it simple. And when the problem isn't as simple, you need to understand what the definition of a major incident might be, when you need to escalate to multiple groups or do additional response steps. Again, the definition of a major incident for PagerDuty is any incident that requires a coordinated response between multiple teams. Normal incidents can be handled by a single team, but as soon as we need to involve others, we step up our own process. And the goal with all of this isn't just to solve the problem. It's to do it in a way which limits the damage and reduces the cost associated with the incident. The less time you spend on unplanned work generated by an incident, the more effective your organization can be. Every organization will need to define their own processes for handling an incident. And some organizations will have different unique needs. There are some common systems that you can use as a starting point. PagerDuty's process is heavily based on the National Incident Management System and the Incident Command System. These were tools originally developed by the U.S. government for wildfire response, but now it's used by everyone from the local fire department to FEMA to have a standardized response that multiple responders are very familiar with. And one of the key points about our process is that anyone can trigger an incident response at any time. PagerDuty integrates with monitoring tools. We work with lots of different things, but we make sure that even though there's monitoring tools and automated alerts, and they all have their place, we want to make sure that there's room for the humans as well. This is really important for us at PagerDuty to lower the barrier to triggering incident response because it's led to a dramatic increase in the speed in which incidents get solved. We've had interns all the way up to C-level staff trigger incidents. We don't want anyone to sit on something just because the alarm hasn't gone off yet. Okay, so now with our definition of an incident and some idea how it might get triggered, we need to put in place some structure for the team. Specifically, which roles do we need to handle a problem, and who should do what in each role? Here's a slightly modified setup, picked up from the incident command system. At PagerDuty, we don't use exactly this setup, but we picked out most of these same roles in one form or another. Overall, the idea is to separate out two sets of work from each other. One set of people is focused on solving the problem, subject matter experts. And another set of people is focused on driving the process or the meta problem solving forward. That's the incident commander, the deputy, the scribe, and so on. Now, today, we're going to focus on the incident commander role. The incident commander is one of the most important roles. Even if you don't have enough people to have a deputy, a scribe, a customer liaison, etc., after you've got at least one subject matter expert, you probably ought to start thinking about having an incident commander. They act as the single source of truth during an incident, and they're the ones driving the problem forward to resolution. Incident commanders should facilitate all of the decisions made by the group, made by the subject matter experts, and no action should really be taken unless the incident commander at least has either tacitly or actively given approval. No matter their day-to-day role, the incident commander is always the person on the call with the most authority. Even if the CEO joins, the incident commander should still be considered outranking them for the purposes of responding to the sound on. And very importantly, an incident commander is not a resolver. They don't resolve the incident. They coordinate and delegate all of the tasks that it will take to resolve the incident. In some fire departments, they have a saying. Incident commanders wear white hard hats to distinguish themselves from the firefighters actually, putting out the fire. The phrase goes, if you ever see someone with a white hard hat holding a wrench, take the wrench out of their hand and bonk them on the head with it. The point being, you should really only ever do one role at a time. So first things first, now that you've got this structure for how you're going to put your teams together, and you've got knowing who's going to be in what role, you're going to need to actually join the call. So once you've been signaled to join an incident call or join your chat room, however it is that your company has chosen to have a communications tool, a shared communications tool, it's time to figure out who the incident commander actually is. There's a difference between who's assigned to be it and who's actually doing the role on the call. There's a simple basic technique that you can use for this. It goes something like this. You can join the call and announce yourself and ask if there's an existing incident commander. If there is, they'll say so. And then that incident commander, it's up to them to decide if you need to be dispatched to a task or you can be released. However, if you join and there's no incident commander responding, you just wait a few moments and then you reintroduce yourself and take the role of the incident commander. Be explicit that you are now the incident commander so that way everyone else on the call knows who is in that role. And this kind of avoids the problem of waiting for the boss to show up, right? If there's no one in charge, it turns out you're in charge. So now that you're the incident commander, good communication is essential. A breakdown in communication can hamper the entire response process. One of your jobs as an incident commander is to manage the communication flow amongst the subject matter experts and the other stakeholders in the incident. This means that you have to maintain some of that communication discipline and continually be driving the conversation forward towards resolving the incident. Here's a really basic loop that you could consider using as an incident commander. It starts at the top by polling your subject matter experts, the people actually solving or with visibility into the problem, asking them for a status. They, in turn, hopefully one at a time, will actually offer you their own status reports, and we'll talk about what a status report is and what a CAN report is. Once you've gotten all of that information, right, you as an incident commander now have, hopefully, at least enough situational context to understand what the next action should be. Maybe one of your subject matter experts has made a request for an action, or maybe you don't have enough information and it's on you as an incident commander to ask your subject matter experts to go find out more. But whatever that next action is, as an incident commander, you're the one driving it forward. You can assign tasks as appropriate, and hopefully you assign them with a callback or some kind of sort of time bounding. The subject matter experts will return back with that task, that next action, and you start back up at the top of the loop, basically finding out what your current situational context is and driving forward next actions. I talked about status reports. So a lot of people, maybe when they first jump into an incident call, they might just say, someone needs to reboot the server, right? That's not a very useful status report. But something like the idea of the server is non-responsive, I propose rebooting it, I will need someone from the operations team to do so, provides the same level of information, but in a much more useful structure. This is a CAN report, a conditions, actions, and needs. It's the same information, but with a little bit of different structure. It helps everybody on the call understand the difference between an observation, the site is down, and a proposed action, rebooting the server. Now, don't worry about being too rote in that loop and asking those questions. It's partially on you as an incident commander, as you're getting that status in those CAN reports, to make sure that you have enough information. Collect your proposed repair actions or proposed next steps from your experts. Make sure that you understand the risks involved. If you need to, you can have that back and forth conversation with the subject matter experts. Oh, so you're saying we're going to restart the server. Well, what happens if we haven't backed it up and we lose all the data? Finding out those details from your subject matter experts informs you as an IC with enough context. But remember that you need to delegate all of those activities to find out more information. You are not the resolver. So now that you've got some situational awareness and you've got some context, you've decided to make a decision, sometimes you can make a decision yourself as an IC, hopefully with, again, a bias towards pushing the issue to resolution. But sometimes you're going to need to leverage the knowledge of your subject matter experts, your incident responders, to make the best decision. Unfortunately, when presented with a choice that some people disagree with, there's lots of opportunities to silently disagree. And that means that people might avoid raising a concern just because they feel that they don't have the room to do so. For example, with this question, should we restart the LB? There's too much room to either stay silent or object for no reason. You might hear somebody just like, I don't think the LB is the problem. I think we need to restart this other thing. Both sides of a debate lose out when it's framed like this, right? There's room for not answering or room for objecting or room for all sorts of other decisions. Remember, the role of the incident commander is to facilitate these discussions. And one simple change to phrasing questions can completely alter the framing of the argument. Are there any strong objections? This is one of the most useful phrases you can learn in your toolkit as an incident commander. It lets you get consensus from an entire group quickly. And it also gives you the ability to say, this is the best decision we're making at this point, right? So you don't have to go back and say, oh, well, we really shouldn't have made this decision. At this point, this is the decision you made, and there were no objections at that time. It also gives room for participants in the call to say, I have a strong objection. I really do think that this is going to result in some additional negative behavior. Whereas before, they might have thought, well, yeah, rebooting might lose all our data, but they didn't ask about that, so I'm not going to talk about it. Most of the time, you won't get any objections from someone on a call, and you can just continue. And as we show here, the proposed putting in that same question in a different context makes it a lot easier. The proposed action is to restart the load balancers. Are there any strong objections? At that point, you've opened the floor up, and now all of the people on the call know what the context and the framing of the question is. And then if nobody objects, you just move on. Now that you've made a decision, you've gathered your status, you've made your decision, it's time to start assigning some tasks. You're going to want to make sure, and again, avoid that bystander effect, very similar to the bystander effect with the answering of a question. You're going to want to make sure that specific people with specific amounts of time get specific tasks. It's okay if you don't necessarily know the name of the person. Again, some organizations get large enough that you're like, oh, well, gee whiz, I don't know everyone's name perfectly, or sometimes pronounce or what have you. But make sure that you say that specific role, the network engineer on call. And it needs to be a single individual. You can't assign tasks to a group because, again, even if it's the network engineers, go figure it out, that's still diffusion of responsibility. And once you've assigned that task, make sure that they acknowledge that they've gotten that task, that assignment from you. As an example, Eric, I'd like you to investigate the increased latency. Try to find the cause. I'll come back to you in 5 minutes. Do you understand? I understood. Again, that very almost mechanical way of dispatching tasks might feel rote. It might feel like perfunctory. But remember, you as an incident commander are not there to be flexible. You're there to basically put in the framework that other people can much easier parse your statements so that they can spend more brain power working on the problem. Another role as incident commander is once you've now gotten all of this information out, you've made your decisions, you're waiting for your subject matter experts to come back to you on tasks, is that you're going to need to notify other stakeholders in the business. Maybe you need to bring in additional teams, or maybe you just need to make other teams like customer service or your executive staff aware. And there's lots of tools available to do this. For example, within the PagerDuty application, we have the ability to update stakeholders and assign different groups as necessary. These status updates can even be pushed out to external systems or mobile devices. Of course, once you have an incident and you start telling stakeholders about what's going on, you might run into a few personality quirks. One class of problem you might have to deal with as an incident commander is what we call executive swoop. It's worth noting, by the way, that this is almost nothing is ever done maliciously on an incident call. Everybody's trying to help, but if you don't take the control of that call and move it forward, other people will try to do so. And everybody's involved, and they want to make sure that this problem gets solved. So again, approach some of these problems we're going to talk about from the perspective of you're being helpful, but I need you to be helpful in a different way. So, for example, with an executive swoop, like, oh, somebody hops on the call and says, I don't agree with us rebooting the servers. I think we should fail over to the disaster recovery site. Some other action that's countermanding what you're saying as an incident commander, you can just basically flip the question around to them. Stop the call for a moment and say, hey, do you want to take over this command? Do you want to take over IC for this call? If the other people don't want to accept the responsibility of driving the call forward, then they'll probably very quickly realize that they were maybe overstepping their bounds. Or alternatively, if you say, hey, do you want to become IC? And they say yes, that's great. We'll talk about the IC handoff process, and it's now their responsibility. Another kind of interruption you might see is people offering additional information. Basically, someone will hop on a call and say, oh my gosh, we have this really important sales demo, or something that we have to be back up in 10 minutes for some reason. This is kind of useful information sometimes. It can provide context, but more often than not, it's just a form of request. It's another form of telling people what to do, but made in an assertion instead of a question. And there again, you can structure that feedback to be either helpful or directed to the appropriate place in handling the incident. So basically, it sounds harsh, but you can say, hey, we're in the middle of this incident. Please keep your comments to the end, or that's great. Please add that to our postmortem notes. There's a fine line here where stakeholders providing that visibility can be useful, but as soon as they start making demands, you need to get them off the call. Another fun, often executive swoop thing you might run into is who's been affected by this. This is different, right? This isn't quite the same kind of demand. This is effectively somebody outside your incident asking for status. The problem is that it might take resources away from solving the problem. So who's been affected by this? Or I'd like a list of customers, or can we update the website status? Things that are maybe not core to what your incident response is doing. You need to drive them away. You need to basically triage them as an incident commander. It's on you to say, I hear you, I understand what your question is, but we don't have time to process that and solve the problem. And of course, as an incident commander, the incident takes priority. Sometimes you'll run into issues that aren't necessarily cleanly one severity or another. Sometimes people will debate about whether or not your whether or not your severity levels or your urgencies, it's 2 a.m., do we really have to be on this call right now? And as a general rule, especially as an incident commander, treat the problem at the most severe level that it could be until you prove otherwise. Again, it's a default. It feels mechanical. It feels rote. But now everyone understands the same context, right? That they're basically, oh, okay, it might possibly be a Sev 1, Sev 2, or Sev 3. We're going to treat it as a Sev 1 until I know better. And that gives everybody, again, more mental bandwidth to actually focus on asking the questions, is it really, are we actually in a Sev 1? Different organizations will then kind of take a different approach. Some organizations will never de-escalate an incident. Some organizations will. At PagerDuty, for example, we do de-escalate. That's, again, up to you as an incident commander. And the worst case, this gives you more practice on your process or more ability to refine what actually got you into an incident response process in the first place. Now that you've hopefully gone through several iterations of that problem-solving loop where you've asked for status, gotten proposed actions, dispatched tasks, and found out results, and as you start to wind down the call, you might need to kick people off the call once they're no longer needed. For example, with the kind of common case of pulling on a network engineer and an application engineer and a DBA, the site's down, we don't know what's going on. As an incident commander, you have all of these resources, all these subject matter experts at your disposal. Once the application engineer and the DBA determine it's an application problem, you should release the network engineer. There's a couple reasons for this. One is because they probably have other things that they should be doing. Two is that people are expensive. And part of your role as an incident commander is to make sure that you're spending the correct amount of people time and effort on the problem. If you have a network engineer just sitting on a phone call for an hour for no reason, that's a waste of everybody's time. So, for example, as an incident commander, you can basically explicitly call out who you want to stay on the call and then let everyone else discharge. Or inversely, it depends on which way you're solving for the problem. You can explicitly call out network engineering, you're no longer required on the call, thank you, and they can leave. Something we found, we talked about, the idea, right, that this is a mechanical, rote process, that you as an incident commander are driving it forward to resolution. we found that about 45 minutes to an hour is the usefulness, a limit of usefulness for an incident commander. And this will be very, very dependent on your organization, your level of severity, and the cognitive level of effort that this incident requires. But if you have a short-term incident, the site's down, a big major incident, a severity 1 incident, incident command is very, very cognitively taxing. And you want to make sure that the incident commander is making the best decisions possible. So you have a way of basically rotating people off of from one incident commander to another. The handover is pretty simple. You basically, behind the scenes, the incident commander, maybe with their deputy, maybe with another person in an incident commander rotation, behind the scenes, do whatever signaling is required to say who's going to be the next one. And then on the call, in band, basically, tell everyone, I'm handing over command to the next incident commander. And the next incident commander, when they come on, maybe you hand them over with the status report or maybe not, but the next incident commander should start right back up at the top of that loop, asking all your subject matter experts for status and making sure that the new incident commander has all the operational context they need. Now, your incident's done, and hopefully the problem has been solved and the business is better. You're not done yet. Every incident, every time you run through an incident process, you should do some form of a post-mortem or after-action report. Let's see here, I've heard them called learning reviews as well. These are critical because you've just spent a whole bunch of organizations' time, effort, and energy learning something. You should make sure to actually learn from what it is that you found out. And one of the most important things about that process is making sure that it's a blameless process. It's not so much that you want to necessarily hold hands and, oh, well, nobody ever makes a mistake, so much as if you don't do that, if you have a blameful postmortem, you will very quickly fall into this vicious cycle of avoiding blame, not speaking up, problems getting worse and worse and worse. So blameless postmortems are just mandatory. When you go through it, make sure that you capture all of the information you can during an incident. This is, again, what one of those roles the scribe we showed in the ICS earlier is really good at, is making sure that things said on a voice bridge are translated to chat, or things that are in chat are brought over onto the voice bridge. And PagerDuty has a postmortem builder if you want to try this out, because it's a way to pull in both chat and, as we talked about earlier, some of the automated systems, as well as annotating that data. Because different organizations have different perspectives on how to do postmortems. Some of them want all of the detail and massively detailed timelines. Other organizations really kind of care more about the shape of a postmortem, like the shape of an incident. When did the problem start? When was the problem detected? When was the incident response process started? And when was the problem resolved? And that shape of all those timestamps can be interesting for some organizations, less so for others. When you're doing a postmortem, one of the things that you should consider is that the impact to the people is just as much a part as the impact to your infrastructure. That you want to make sure, oh, wait, we only had one network engineer who's on call 24/7 for a whole week at a time. Okay, we need additional people because this network engineer took too long to respond to the incident because they were busy sleeping. So make sure that the whole of the process is investigated, not just the specific problem that happened for that incident. Another thing to be aware of when you're working on postmortems, there's 3 cognitive biases that you may not normally encounter in everyday life that you should be thinking about when you're writing up a postmortem. These are counterfactual reasoning, normative language, and mechanistic reasoning. Counterfactual reasoning is, again, something I suspect a lot of people just write even without thinking about it. Counterfactual reasoning, the server would likely have stayed up except we didn't clean out the temp directory. Well, you're now not talking about what actually happened. You know, that statement is no longer about what happened in the problem, in the incident. You're basically reasoning about an alternate universe. So avoid counterfactual reasoning. Normative language is about things like insufficient and some keywords to look for. We had insufficient monitoring. We would have caught this problem, but we had insufficient disk space monitoring. Well, wait a minute. Again, you had whatever threshold of monitoring you had. There was a reason for it. If you're trying to solve that problem, make sure that you call it out separately from what it was versus what you want it to be. And mechanistic reasoning is something that I think more and more infrastructure engineers are going to run into, especially in kind of this world of containers and microservices and service-oriented architectures. Mechanistic reasoning is about assuming that the system is in perfect working order until the incident. That, oh, well, everything was working just great. Well, actually, no. This one link from this one server to this other server had 20% packet loss, but when it went over to 25% packet loss, we noticed it. So avoiding mechanistic reasoning is also useful in postmortems. If you want a real kind of pro tip and really level up your incident commander game, record your incident calls and review them afterwards. Again, you can play that out at like 1.2 or 1.5 speed. Oftentimes, some calls that go for hours will have a lot of dead air time on them. But listening to those incident calls, you can even sometimes form a incident call listening group with your other ICs. Really kind of shows you when you have gaps in your process or learning small tips and tactics from other incident commanders. I think I talked about this a little bit earlier, but make sure, again, to regularly review the incident process itself, not just necessarily at the end of a postmortem, but as well think about it as an incident commander coverage, or what are our thresholds for severities? Does the rest of the business still align with our business process, with our incident process? As your company grows, the same thing you did when you had 10 employees of, oh, well, we're going to tell every single customer, probably doesn't scale when you have 300 employees and millions of customers. One of the last sort of pro tips for being an incident commander or getting more of this mechanistic knowledge into your organization is practicing it. Lots of companies will do things like Failure Fridays or game days. Some, like Amazon, has the idea of chaos engineering, which basically injects failure into your systems in a controlled way. Don't just test your infrastructure, test your people. Use those opportunities, use those failures as a way to practice, hopefully they're controlled failures, as a way to practice the rest of your incident response process. It's also really, really great if you have this sort of controlled failure scenario to use that to level up new incident commanders when they still have their training wheels, right? So that it's 2 p.m., we're all sitting around the conference table, we have complete control of the situation, instead of, congratulations, you're a brand new incident commander, it's 3 a.m. and the site's down. So then to kind of wrap up and have a little bit of a summary, make sure that you have your incident command structure in place beforehand. Have clearly delineated roles and know who's going to be doing what. As an incident commander, it's your responsibility to manage the conversation flow towards resolving the incident. Make sure to make clear decisions that give the room and give the group the ability to agree or disagree. Once you pull people in, make sure that you're actually taking advantage of them being a part of the process, or make sure that they don't have to be part of the process anymore. Do postmortems, learn from your incident response, and then practice as much as you can. And if all of this wasn't enough, you can learn more about our incident response process by going to response.pagerduty.com. We've open sourced all of our internal documentation, as well as links to a lot of other resources on the web that you'll find valuable, whether you're an incident commander or an incident responder, or just somebody else involved in the business who you need to make the case to. And with that, I think we're going to open up for questions. I see we have, let's see here, a question from Simon. What happens if nobody volunteers to be the incident commander? How can you make sure there's always one on the call? So there's a couple different parts to this. as an incident commander, you're going to need a rotation for this. Like if you use a tool like PagerDuty, you can simply set up a separate schedule and a separate rotation for the people in your organization who wish to be a part of that process. And so that's how, kind of you can use those schedules. When you say nobody volunteers, though, there's two different parts. Somebody in your company at some point is going to take the responsibility. Hopefully it is at least somebody who understands the concerns about your boss screaming at you to solve a problem and takes a little bit more of a humane approach. But one of the things I've seen be really successful in some organizations is actually a volunteer incident commander rotation. If you've got one team or multiple teams, your subject matter experts, they're probably going to be on call, maybe not so voluntarily. But especially for an incident commander, that's a particular role where you might literally have to stare down the CEO and say, this is not the most important thing to solve right now. I need you to leave. And that's maybe something that you want people to volunteer for, just so that they have that investment and that ownership and understanding this is the role we're taking on. So I've seen volunteer, you're still volunteering into like a PagerDuty schedule or some sort of rotation, but I've seen volunteer ICs be very successful. And then I think I can mark that as answered. And then another question from Ansi. How are the ways that you define incidents of different severity levels? Well, how does PagerDuty categorize P1s from P3s or P5s? So a lot of PagerDuty's original founders came from Amazon, and so we inherited a lot of Amazon's prioritization scheme. So we have 5 severity levels from SEV 5 down to SEV 1. SEV 1 is the most impactful. And so within individual teams, severity 3 to severity 5 is basically left up to them, right? That's what we talked about at the beginning, that individual teams can decide for themselves how they want to respond to an incident and what customer impact means for their particular service. Severity 1 and severity 2, though, are reserved for basically cross-cutting problems. These are problems where we've determined that there's an impact to the customer, that our customers are having some sort of an untoward experience, and it's going to take more than one team to solve the problem. There's also, for us, there is a bit of a time-based component. Again, PagerDuty needs to have very reliable notifications, so we need to make sure that we're doing them within a certain time frame. So a lot of customer impacts that might only be considered a severity 2 because it's less than 1% of customers or something, they all get escalated to severity 1 after different time intervals for different levels of customer impact. All right, and I think that's all the questions we have answered and asked. And with that, I want to say thank you very much for joining us today.